in my hand on the bus. The people start to think I'm nuts. What's next? I can't find my tooth. And if that ain't enough, I think my uncle had it rough. And I have lost my youth. Once I had a drug, but I couldn't give it up. Take it with you now. That's the life I would choose. Get your head on the bus. There's a lot that's left to do. My buddy's a moose without coup. It's not a tool I would use. It's not a gavel or news. What's up? It's on the 4th of July. That's right, if the dog wants to play, I'm about to pick it up. And now it's time to realize I'm going out to look for a world without coup. What's that? Yeah, a wife without you. You said it, cause I haven't seen the world without coup yet. What you waiting for? I'm inside. Don't you think I haven't been there? I know some people in hell. I hear there's something underneath the street.
What's up, people? How y'all doing today? We're back with another book, because that's what I do here. I read books and I give an analysis on the book. In this case, we're in our 3rd installment of Howard M. Sachar's History of Israel. And so what I'll do is I'll give a little recap of what we've gone through so far, and then I will continue on with the lesson as we've come to know it. So let me get my boomer glasses on. These things they're not the prettiest, but the nice big lenses on them, they don't really get in my way. They're user friendly. And so just to recap on what we've done so far in this book. The book starts out in the first decade of the 1800s. The Jews of Western Europe were granted equal citizenship under the orders of Napoleon as part of a new way of demonstrating the revolutionary ethos. And the Jews were expected, in turn, to fully assimilate, speaking the local languages and shedding their traditional trappings. And this was even formalized under the auspices of a temporary resurrection. I don't know why that's so hard to say. This is like my 3rd time trying to say it. And this was even formalized under the auspices of a temporary resurrection of the Sanhedrin in a public ceremony. And a majority of secular Jews were more than ready to acquiesce to Napoleon's decree, get out of their enclaves, and pursue better careers and more fulfilling lives. The Jews of Eastern Europe lived under more oppressive social and political circumstances, and they adhered strongly to religious and traditional practices. There were fewer secularists in Eastern Europe. Ergo, they held fast to their traditional aspirations of returning to their homeland. But for Western Jews, the Zionist dream was dissipating. Modern political Zionism was born in Eastern Europe when an underground movement of writers became inspired to commit to colonization of Palestine, where God would return to his people. Under Alexander II in Russia, oppression of Jews was somewhat alleviated, and a humanistic renaissance in their community was born, called the Haskalah, which would prepare them for their return to Israel. Yet this enlightenment drove them somewhat out of the messianic mindset and to some degree into secularism, and didn't necessarily drive them to their goal. However, this did lead to their reviving the Hebrew into everyday affairs. A new sort of approach was necessary to bring the secular Jews back into the fold in order to fulfill the Zionist dream. Peretz Smolensk recognized this and introduced, through his writings, a more nationalistic revival approach to rallying the secularist Jews back into the spirit. And this would bring them together and promote unity in solving some of their political and social problems. There was already quite a bit of nationalist fervor going on in other parts of Europe at the time. And the early Zionist leaders used this momentum to try and inspire and bring together all Jews into a common national consciousness. With the prevailing success of nationalism for its own sake in other countries, the common religious aspect was sort of the glue to achieving the aims of this new cause. One of the original Jewish nationalist writers was Moses Hess, who had gone to school with Karl Marx. So, let's see what Wikipedia has to say about Moses Hess. I went over him a little bit back in episode 11. He's the one who married the prostitute for socialist compassion. So he actually introduced Friedrich Engels to communism. And Engels repaid him by having sex with his wife, who later claimed that Engels raped her. So, all you communist apologists out there who think that these guys are good people, yeah, think again. So, Hess fell out with Engels and Marx and fled to Switzerland following the 1848 Commune. Hess had disagreed with Marx and Engels regarding class struggle and economic causes for historical events. He was more of a racial struggle theory kind of guy. Hess was against Jewish assimilation. He published Roman Jerusalem in 1862, which prefigured later Zionist doctrines. He was into the idea of Jewish national revival. He knew Germans would be hostile to a Jewish national movement, and so his book calls for the establishment of a Jewish socialist commonwealth in Palestine. So here we see a sort of Jewish national socialism taking shape. Hess was actually influenced by Mazzini and the rise of Italian nationalism at the time. This is all pre-Mussolini, pre-fascism. He saw this as the only way to respond to anti-Semitism and assert Jewish identity in the modern world. He foretold the collaboration of several other governments and powerful business magnates in helping to revive a Jewish nation in the Middle East, one of which was the Rothschilds. It wasn't until long after Hess's death in 1875 that he was recognized as an ideological, prophetic visionary for Zionism. He helped bring about a transition from Zionism as an intellectual theory to an urgent survivalist movement. Now, I made a mistake in episode 11 when I said that the 1881 pogroms erupted under Alexander II. Remember, Alexander II? It was actually under Alexander III, after the assassination of his father Alexander II by Russian revolutionaries. Alexander III instituted a more reactionary, autocratic style governing. The pogroms and anti-Semitic riots happened on his watch. He was committed to Russian homogeneity as the foundation of autocratic power. And consequently, the Jews were the most vulnerable of all the empire's minorities. They remained mostly confined to their pale of settlement, and they were easily scapegoated as revolutionary conspirators. They took immense losses in lives and property under the institutional pogroms of 1881. Okay, so that's the recap. So, now for the current portion. Let me get some water here. Play some music during our break. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a snack. Let's all go to the bathroom. Let's all go to the bathroom. Let's all go to the bathroom to take ourselves a shit. Okay. So now for the current portion. After Count Nikolai Ignatieff issued his report stating that Alexander II's policy of toleration for the Jews had failed, Alexander III issued the May Laws, a series of anti-Jewish decrees in 1882 in the form of temporary regulations, which weren't so temporary and got steadily worse up until the March Revolution of 1917. By these laws, all further rural areas were closed to Jewish settlement. Within the Pale, Jews were driven from the countryside into the city slums. Tighter restrictions for school admissions prevented entry into professions. The economic base of Russian Jewish life was terribly undermined. By 1900, 40% of Russian Jews were financially dependent on charity and remittances. They found themselves in existential jeopardy. In other words, the government was succeeding in their effort. They were consciously culling the Jewish population. They figured 1/3 would die out, 1/3 would leave, and the other third would dissolve into the surrounding population, effectively erasing their culture from the landscape. Even in other parts of Europe, Jews were getting squeezed out of the workforce just as much by the onset of the industrial crisis. They were reduced to abject poverty. The next section is called, I guess it's a section called Palestine as Refuge in Renaissance. The Russian Jews were completely disenfranchised under the May Laws and pogroms under Tsarist rule. Even their faith in Enlightenment humanism was attacked. They were getting hit from all sides. Most of them just wanted to be good, productive citizens, and they were being shown the door. And although some Russian Jews attempted to socialize, capital S, and band together, for most, an awareness of an undercurrent towards emigration was taking place. The U.S. was commonly considered. However, for many, continuing as a minority among Gentiles was not a solution. As Russian mobs were tearing through Jewish neighborhoods, scaring people into the basement, many humanists set their sights on Palestine and even published articles sharing their ideas. Pierre Smolenskin, the great Haskalah writer, abandoned his idea of the Jews as a strictly spiritual nation and called for mass immigration to the homeland. Yet some, especially Western Jews, nourished the dream that over time Gentile prejudice might subside, and for secular Jews who didn't cherish the ancient folk memories of Israel, there had to be another reason to go back. Leo Pinsker brought a more scientific reason about. In the 1800s, he had been optimistic about the benign reform era under Alexander II. He believed in Russian toleration and Jewish enlightenment. He had a vision of the Jewish future as one of cultural self-expression inside a diverse Russia. However, in 1871, there was an anti-Jewish outbreak for a while in Odessa, where he lived. And so he withdrew from all public activities for 7 years and brooded over the evident failure of his hopes for Enlightenment ideals for liberation. In 1881, Pinsker left Russia to visit leaders in Central and Western Europe in a failed attempt to persuade them of his ideas for Jewish survival. He remained for several months in Berlin, where he published his views in an article called Auto-Emancipation. His central argument here was that normal human interactions between people are built on respect and not love. And given the lack of the prerequisite of national equality, it was unlikely the Jews would be accorded that respect, because they had no fatherland of their own, no government, no representation, no center of gravity. Although they bore many of the characteristics of nationhood, they possessed no land of their own. Pinsker wrote, "There is something unnatural about a people without a territory, just as there is about a man without a shadow. And worse yet, they inspired fear and distrust among the non-Jewish majority. And what people fear, they hate. If the prejudice of mankind against them rested upon anthropological and social principles, innate and ineradicable, it was futile to seek the disappearance of these natural laws. Through enlightenment, assimilation, dispersion, or Jewish ultra-patriotism. The solution to their condition lay not in reliance upon emancipation, but in their own concerted attempt to utilize their fleeting opportunity to restore a national home of their own. Only on this foundation could the Jews achieve a comparable structure to other nations. Now or never was the word of the day. For the sake of their descendants, it was incumbent upon them to act as the moment remained." The scientific aspect to this is that he didn't necessarily attach any specific sentimental importance to Palestine here. It could have been a small territory in North America or in Turkey. What mattered most was recognized nationhood on a land. Any land. Okay, so I'll end this here. But I will actually go back to the cast of characters briefly for this book, and we'll see what Wikipedia has to offer. One personage who comes up in the first episode was Rabbi Judah Alkali, or Yehuda ben Solomon Chai Alkali, born in 1789 in Bosnia, and he died in 1878 in Jerusalem. So he was a Sephardic Jewish rabbi, an influential precursor of modern Zionism, along with Prussian Rabbi Zvi Hirsch Kalischer, whom I will go into in a minute. So Alkali, he played an important role in a process widely attributed to Ashkenazi Jews. He became known through his advocacy for the restoration of the Jews in the Holy Land, and may be regarded as one of the precursors of the modern Zionists like Theodor Herzl. When Alkali was born in Sarajevo in 1789, Bosnia was ruled by the Ottoman Empire. He studied in Jerusalem, which also belonged to the Ottoman Turkish Empire. There he came under the influence of the Kabbalah. In 1825, he became reader and teacher at Semlin, today's Belgrade, and then the community's rabbi a few years later. At the time of his arrival, the region was experiencing nationalist movements and the Serbian War of Independence, which contributed to new nationalistic ideas among Balkan Jews like Alkali. In 1852, he established the Society of the Settlement of Eretz Yisrael in London. In 1871, he established a short-lived colonization society in Jerusalem. In 1874, he moved there with his wife, and he died in 1878, just days after his native Bosnia was occupied by the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Okay, so what was this Haskalah? Haskalah. Eddie Haskalah. Gee, Mrs. Cleaver, you sure look good in that dress this evening. It was often, okay, so the Haskalah, it was often termed as the Jewish Enlightenment, an intellectual movement among Jews of Central and Eastern Europe, with a certain influence on those in Western Europe as well. It arose in the 1770s as a defined ideological worldview, and it ended around 1881 with the rise of Jewish nationalism. The Haskalah pursued two complementary aims: to preserve the Jews as a separate, unique collective, a set of projects of cultural and moral renewal, including the revival of Hebrew for use in secular life, which resulted in an increase of Hebrew found in print. It strove for an optimal integration in surrounding societies. They promoted the adoption of modern values. They pursued economic production and the taking up of new occupations. The Haskalah promoted rationalism, liberalism, and freedom of thought, basically the Jewish version of the Age of Reason. The movement encompassed a wide spectrum, from moderates to radicals. It fulfilled an important, though limited, part in the modernization of Central and Eastern European Jews. Its activists, the Maskilim, implemented communal educational and cultural reforms in both the public and private spheres. It collided with both the traditionalist rabbinic elite, who wanted to preserve old Jewish values in their entirety, and the radical assimilationists, who wished to minimize the existence of the Jews as a defined collective, like those Jews keeping with the Napoleonic Agreement of Assimilation. So, one book I've been reading lately is Niall Ferguson's biography of Henry Kissinger. And it goes into depth about his upbringing in the industrial Bavarian town of Fürth, near Nuremberg. Historically, this town had a strong Jewish presence, and during Kissinger's youth, he spoke very little about any of this, by the way. He always downplayed his childhood as not being a significant influence on his later vocation. But the biographer does go into detail about the social climate at the time. And he talks about the difference between the traditional, more Orthodox Jews and the progressive or even secular Jews who tried to fit in and assimilate with the Germans as much as possible. And a lot of them even adopted like Christian kind of traditions and mores. Like they started like putting pews in their churches, and they had the same kind of setup that you'd see in, even Protestant churches. But even well before this time, they were quite used to maltreatment by the Germans. Okay, yeah, so let me back up a second. So he talks about the difference between the traditional, more Orthodox Jews and the progressive or even secular Jews who tried to fit in and assimilate with the Germans as much as possible. But even well before this time, they were quite used to maltreatment by the Germans. And so maybe I'll do a short analysis of this entry, like maybe in another episode. I'll go into Henry Kissinger's book and talk about this because it's pretty interesting. And he talks about like the soccer teams and all this stuff. So that was Kissinger's big thing. He followed the local soccer teams. He wasn't, even though he was like alive and kind of like a young man, like a teenager through the 1930s and the whole, as the Nazis came through. Like I said, he kind of downplays this in his story. I think maybe exaggeratedly, but he just basically says that all he cared about was soccer. So one more character. We'll go into Zvi Hirsch Kalischer, born in 1795 in Prussia, today's Leszno, Poland, and died in 1874, another area of modern-day Poland. Kalischer was a German Orthodox rabbi who expressed views from obviously a religious perspective in favor of Jewish resettlement in the land of Israel, which predate Theodor Herzl and the modern Zionist movement. ZH was the grandfather of Solomon Kalischer. So I get the feeling that this book that I'm reading now, the one I'm covering, the history of Israel, is going to go into like Theodor Herzl and all that stuff. But like right now, it's kind of like the sort of pre-Zionist movement. So Zvi Hirsch, he studied the systems of medieval and modern Jewish and Christian philosophers. His thoughts centered on the settlement of the land of Israel by the Jews and transforming the many Jewish beggars of the Holy Land into a population which could support itself, practicing agriculture. So he proposed to collect money for this purpose from Jews in all countries, to buy and cultivate land in Israel, to found an agricultural school either in Israel itself or at least in France. And this kind of in a way makes me think of Dune because Israel was a desert basically, and they turned it into a really lush and gorgeous landscape through I'm trying to remember the word for this. What do you call it? Terraforming. So they basically terraformed the area and turned it into a really lush and beautiful sort of oasis out there in the desert, basically. And this idea that they would found an agricultural school and sort of buy up and cultivate this land and turn the land into something beautiful. For some reason, it kind of reminds me of Frank Herbert's Dune, where it's sort of all about ecology and terraforming and stuff. Okay, so he proposed to collect money from Jews in all countries, buy and cultivate land, found an agricultural school, form a Jewish military guard for the security of the colonies. And he thought the time was favorable to carry out this agenda. He had support from Edmund James Rothschild, among others. In his book, his main theses were that the salvation promised by the prophets would come through self-help, that immediate emigration to Israel was necessary, and that they were to observe the sacrifices in Jerusalem in the present day. He believed that they could speak to all the nations that believed in the Bible and persuade them that this was a logical course to take, and that the salvation of the Jewish nation was part of the salvation of the world. Okay? So I'll end it here. I don't want to go on for too long because the stuff starts getting kind of dense. All this history and stuff. But yeah.
Hey, off-grid pioneers, are you searching?
The fuck was that? I don't know how that came around. I guess Bob Barker died. My news came up. Bob Barker died. The price is wrong, bitch. Poor guy. He was old. He was an old dude. He was an old dude when I was a little kid. Ah, my freaking back hurts. I'm gonna stretch out my back for a second. Oh shit. I'm gonna turn off the AC real quick. Okay, so yeah, my back is stretched. Excuse me. Man, I gotta stop eating before I do these episodes. I'm always like burping and gulping and bubbling like a... Yeah, I'm like percolating. I'm percolating over here. I kind of wanted to talk about crypto because I've been meaning to talk about it because I spend a lot of my time thinking about it. You know, I study it. I study crypto. I listen to a lot of live stream, like podcast type things about it. And I invest in it. And I don't want to talk too much about it because, of course, not financial advice. Not giving financial advice here. One thing I will say is that if you're like anything like me and you live like a normal, like trudging 9 to 5 type of life, you might want to get some. I'm not telling you which ones to get, you know. I'm not trying to shill securities over here or whatever. That's the weird thing I think about a lot of this crypto regulation that's happening, is that they're not really regulating it. They're just sort of like hands off, and then every now and then they'll just like attack somebody who's doing, you know, work in the crypto industry. They'll attack people in the industry for breaking laws that don't exist. So what they'll do is they'll interpret it. They'll interpret a law. They'll say, "Oh, well, you're, you know, listing unregistered securities," but they're not really like saying, you know, what it means for a crypto to be a security and all this stuff. And so they're not really regulating crypto. They're just randomly attacking people because they want to sort of terrorize the industry. They feel so threatened by the industry, you know, because our government is run by bankers, and the bankers are the ones who are threatened by crypto. Although they're getting into it, which is strange because it's like, of course, they want a piece of it. They don't want to be left out, but they're also, I think, kind of afraid of it. I think, unless they're just behind it. I mean, I have no idea who's behind Bitcoin. It could be anybody. I mean, it could be like the CIA for all we know. But it could be this, and a lot of conspiracy theorists think this. Like, I've heard this from like Jason Burmis and Catherine Austin Fitts, where they think that crypto is something that is sort of like Bitcoin was created by the CIA in order to get people kind of warmed up for digital blockchain money so that they can kind of throw their trap and get us with these CBDCs. And that it's just here to kind of warm us up to CBDCs. But I don't know about all that. I think that's a little bit paranoid. Like, the more I learn about crypto, I think that a lot of those conspiracy theorists, they don't really know a lot about crypto. And, you know, I'm part of a sort of online crypto community, and if you're like me and you're not very tech savvy and you don't really know a whole lot about this stuff, you kind of want to like listen to people who know who they're talking. People who know what they're talking about. People who put all their time into it. Like these dorks that are just completely obsessed by it. And I found some dorks who are like some really good guys, and they dedicate their lives to this thing, and they know all about it. They know more about it even than someone like Catherine Austin Fitts, who is she's a financial guru. But she's a TradFi guru, not a crypto guru. And so crypto is kind of a whole nother thing. And so, I mean, I've put thousands of hours into learning about crypto, but I don't really know that much about it because I'm not a technical guy. I've never done coding. I've never developed software or any of that stuff. And if you're not one of those people, you're only going to know so much about it. And, you know, there's a lot of people who really get into the sort of drama and the politics of like the different crypto coins because, you know, they're all like their own little tribe. And the funny thing about crypto is sort of like a little bit of a cross between like, it's like tribalism and it's finance, but it's also almost like entertainment, and it's almost like religion. And so these people, and I've fallen into it too, to where you get into like a certain ecosystem, like a coin, you know, like say if you know, are really into like, you know, Polygon or something like that. And you got like your Polygon people, and they're all about it, and they think that Polygon is the way, like that's their messiah that's gonna bring them to the promised land. And so they put all their money into Polygon, and they get angry at people who don't like Polygon, and if they hear somebody trying to FUD Polygon, they get all angry about it, and they hate that person, and then they go and make videos and talk shit about those people. So I don't like to get into any of that. I like to be diversified in crypto, and so I've got a lot of coins. I don't want to say how many different coins I'm invested in, because it's ridiculous. I'm invested in too many. But one thing I will say is that I've got the majority of my money in like probably 3 to 5 coins. And there's certain coins that I invest in them just to stack the coins. So because right now we're sort of in the doldrums of the bear market, and right now it's today is August 26, 2023. So we're in the doldrums of the bear market, meaning that like Bitcoin and Ethereum have already hit their bottoms back like in November-ish. And I think that's when Bitcoin hit its lows, was in November. And I think Ethereum might have bottomed even before that. You could check me on that. I think I'm not absolutely sure, but I think that Bitcoin and Ethereum have already bottomed for this bear market. And now at this point, all the altcoins are bottomed. Right now is like the nadir of the prices for all of the altcoins. So right now is like the supermarket sweepstakes where you go and get everything on clearance. And the only trick is you got to figure out which ones are going to make it and which ones aren't, because my guys told me this I'm talking about like the influencers that I listen to. I've got like a handful of people I listen to. And so the main 2 guys that I listen to, they basically told me a year and 3 months ago, that like even though they're not really into Polygon, and they're not into Cardano either. They've talked shit about Cardano ever since I was listening to them. But I was surprised to hear them say, hey, we think Cardano's going to do something this time around. And Cardano probably will, but now they're saying that Polygon's not. And I've got a little bit of Polygon, but not very much. And I had some Cardano, but I had to sell it to get my car fixed. So I guess I got to get more of that stuff. But the main coins that I'm in, obviously, if you're in crypto, you have to have Bitcoin and you have to have Ethereum. For me, it's a lot harder to hold on to Ethereum because Ethereum is used on all your DEXs, all your decentralized exchanges. And so Ethereum is the main gas token for any ERC20s that you're going to be trading. And so it's really hard to hold on to Ethereum because when the gas prices are high, you have to use it up in order to do transactions. And a lot of times, especially if you're using MetaMask, you're trading Ethereum into other things like Hex, or if you want to bridge it into Pulse Chain or any of that stuff, you have to do it. You have to use your Ethereum to do that. So it's really hard for me to hold on to any Ethereum. And it seems like I'm constantly buying Ethereum and I never have enough Ethereum. But Bitcoin is kind of like that money that just sits there. That's kind of like your gold in the safe, is that Bitcoin. And so you want to have Bitcoin. And I think, as far as I can tell, I think that the object of the game in crypto is to get as much Bitcoin as you can, right? And so that seems to be like the one asset that is going to outlast them all, hopefully, right? As long as we don't all go to this central bank digital currency. But so as far as I can tell, the object is to try and cultivate as much Bitcoin as possible, and all the altcoins are used to sort of leverage up your Bitcoin, because you're not going to make millions of dollars by just saving your money and putting it into Bitcoin, because in Bitcoin the market's just kind of typically just crab along, and sometimes they'll start going in like a downward trajectory, like the last 2 years. When I got in, when I first got into crypto, it was November of 2022. No, actually it was November of 2021. And that was like sort of the top of the bear market. And I didn't really know it. And the guys I was listening to were like, oh, the bull market's still going. You know, we still got, you know, a fifth wave coming. So I was buying Bitcoin then. And it's just been dumping ever since. And so I've done nothing but lose money in crypto. I haven't made any money. I've lost money. And so as much as I've lost, I've actually gained a lot of crypto. It's just that the value's down really low. And so when Bitcoin was down towards its bottom below 20,000, I bought some. But I keep finding myself having financial issues and having to sell off crypto. And that's the hardest thing for me, is trying not to sell off my crypto for stupid shit. So I just really try not to do it. And in any way that I can, I try and tuck crypto away. So I've got like all these different wallets, and I'll even hide it from myself, you know. So I'll have one wallet, and I'll have like, you know, when you have like a MetaMask wallet, it serves several different blockchains. You've got you know, you've got your Binance chain, your Phantom chain, your Optimism chain, your Arbitrum chain, your Ethereum chain, your Pulse chain. So you got all these different blockchains that are accessible through MetaMask. And I just try and kind of like stuff little bits of money here and there and make it harder to get to. And sometimes I'll have a coin that just has like a couple $100 in it. And that way it discourages me from cashing it out, because I have to pay the gas fee in order to send it back to an exchange and then, you know, try to, you know, liquidate it. And so in a way, it's almost like you're the squirrel kind of hiding nuts from yourself. And so that's part of it. And then another aspect of crypto is the staking. And the best staking that I've found is through Hex. And I also stake some not Arbitrum, which Kusama on the Polkadot chain. So you've got all these different wallets, right? So Polkadot has a wallet called the Fearless Wallet, and you can stake on the Fearless Wallet. And I tried to get to a point to where I was staking my Polkadot, but you have to have like, well, last time I checked, you had to have like $2,000 worth of Polkadot just to begin staking. And I never got up to that level. I was almost there, and I had to sell a bunch of it, like I said, to get my car fixed. That was the same event as when I sold my Cardano. So I had all this Polkadot sitting there, but the Polkadot isn't really moving. I was almost using Polkadot as kind of a stable coin, because it was just kind of sitting there at like $5 for like months and months and months. And now it's down a little bit lower, which is probably be a great time for me to buy back, because last time I checked, it was under $5. I think I sold it at like, you know, $5.25 or something like that. But $5.38 maybe I sold it at to get my car fixed. And so yeah, if I was to find it around $4, it'd be a good time to buy it back. But I wasn't really doing anything with my Polkadot because I wasn't staking it yet, and I almost wanted to like turn it all into Hex and just do it, you know, a nice big long stake in Hex. But then Hex took a shit, you know, on Ethereum, and now everybody's over on Pulse chain, and they're saying that, oh, the Pulse Hex is the only Hex that's worth having. But whenever there's like a public sentiment like that, I always kind of go the opposite direction. I always try to do what other people are not doing, and I don't know if that's like not smart or what, but like I always figure if everybody on YouTube is saying one thing, like I'm gonna do the opposite. That way, like, I don't know if that's just me trying to outsmart the market, and I don't try to dump too much money into that, but like if everybody's saying, oh, you know, like forget about, you know, Ethereum Hex, I'm gonna go buy a bunch of that because it's cheaper, and then I'm gonna stake it out, and then like 10 years from now, or you know, 5 years from now, when everybody realizes that they were wrong, I'm gonna have all these T-shares over on Ethereum, right? And so that's kind of what I've got going. I've got like a staking ladder, and I've got like 8 different stakes in Hex going. So I got that to look forward to. I got like one coming out every year, and but now I don't have any staking going on over on Pulse Chain yet. So I'm starting to build my bag over on Pulse Chain, my hex bag on Pulse Chain. And so I've got a 555, what, 5555 set up for my son over on Pulse Chain. So he kind of beat me to it. I got him his Pulse Chain stake before I got my own. And so I'm looking forward to setting up my first, Pulse Hex stake on that side. And so Hex is something that's pretty exciting for me. I'm looking forward to seeing the movie. I hear everybody talking about it, and I mean, I think by now I feel like I've kind of got my own version of it in my head because I've heard so many people talk about it. But yeah, so Bitcoin, Ethereum, Hex, Pulse Chain, PulseX, PHEX and EHEX, and then DOT and Kusama, right? And I'm staking the Kusama, and it's just, and then you got your Hedron and Icosa now on Ethereum, and they're getting ready to upgrade it. So now somehow I have to upgrade all my coins, even though I'm staking. So I think you can upgrade your stakes as well on Hedron. And so I've got my son is staking some Hedron too in Icosa, and so that's a nice little generator, little yield generator, and then Spooky Swap over on Phantom, and or should I say Phantom on Spooky Swap, but Spooky Swap is a good yielding coin if you have the NFT, which sort of turbocharges your stake. So if you have the NFT that goes with it, you can get 35-40% yield, and so that's pretty good yield if the price ever goes back up. And if the price ever goes back up, that might be the one coin that makes me rich. If Spooky Swap goes back to all-time highs, I'm going to have a nice chunk of change. So I'm looking forward to that, and it's nice and cheap right now. Now's a good time, I think, to buy some of that. Not financial advice, but if I'm gonna buy any more shit coins, I'm gonna get some more Spooky Swap, because I'm looking at that one as one that I can cash in pretty good on. That's gonna be I'm gonna buy a nice expensive guitar, or maybe a car or something, once I take profits on my Spooky Swap, or once I cash it out, once I finally liquidate it, because by the end of this bull market, I don't know if Spooky Swap is coming back. I don't know that it's not, but I'm not going to count on it. So once I take my profits in Spooky Swap, I think I might leave maybe 20% of my bag there for a moon bag or whatever. But what else we got? Binance Chain, Binance Coin. I don't do any yielding on the Binance Chain. I like the Binance Coin because it holds up its price really well, and it's not, I would say that it might even be less volatile than Bitcoin, and so it's a good place to just hold cash. If you just want to and if you're holding it on your MetaMask, again, you're making it a little bit harder to get to, so it kind of de-incentivizes you from cashing out. And so I like to hold money in Binance Coin. And so that's just kind of a placeholder for me. And I might even use Binance Coin to take profits, because I don't really trust the quote unquote stable coins like Tether and what's the other one? Freaking USDC. I don't trust USDC. It lost its peg earlier in the year, and everybody freaked out. And so I think I'll probably take some profits in stable coins, but I'll probably take a lot of them. Probably when I take my Bitcoin profits, I'll put those into altcoins, and then when I take my altcoin profits, I'll probably take those into Bitcoin or something like Binance, or maybe even Polkadot, because Polkadot just kind of sits there for the most part. Um, and yeah, there's some coins I only have like a little bit of money in, like just because I kind of want to get used to using them, and because I like to watch the price. And so if you're invested just a little bit in a coin, it kind of gets you motivated to sort of watch that coin and see what it does. And so if you got like maybe just $200 and something like Arbitrum, you can kind of pay attention to what Arbitrum's doing. Um, and so, and at the same time, I like to cultivate those bags as well. But I try to do my main focus on one. It's good to have like financial capital in just a few coins, because like those are the ones that, like, if those ones run, you find the ones that are the most promising. And it's kind of hard to like make a lot of money when you only have like $200 like here and there, like in 20 different coins. It's harder to make money. You need to have a little bit of like what's the word I'm looking for? Economic mass. You want to have like a good solid chunk of money in a coin if you want that coin, if you want to get rich anyway, if you want to make a lot of money, if you want to get good solid returns, you have to have a lot of financial capital in one coin, and let that coin run, and instead of having just like $5 here and there. I mean, because even if you do like, you could do like 100x on $5 and you're only going to get $500. It's not very much. And so you want $5,000 in that thing that's going to do 100x. Then that's how you're going to make your money. So I try to have like certain coins I'm concentrated in, and I've got a few like moonshot bags, like little shit coins that I've got some capital in. And then I try to have the main, shall we say, more secure coins, stuff like Bitcoin and Ethereum, where like I try to keep a good amount of capital in those coins, because that's going to be my cash reserve in case I fuck up my car or something. I need to get a new car. I mean, I'm going to have to dip into those funds at some point, and I don't want to have to do that. God willing, please don't let my car break down. I don't want to have to sell my crypto. But anyway, I don't want to go too much into that. Like I said, I don't really know a lot about this stuff. I just follow it. I just hope. It's like my hopium, praying to get rich and get out of this slave wage lifestyle of going to work every day. I'd rather sit at home and play guitar, honestly. Get my band back together, get back in the studio and finish my album. One of the things I've been wanting to do, and I've been thinking about it for a long time, and I've talked about it, I feel like I've made this kind of false promise and now I've got to live up to it, is I've been wanting to go through some of my Russian language stuff. And like I said before, I don't want to do some basic course in Russian and try and be that Russian language instructor or whatever. I don't really speak the language very well, honestly. I'm learning it, and I've been learning it for like 5 years at least. I started a long time ago. I mean, over the last year, I haven't hardly done anything in it. But actually, I've learned more Spanish in the last 2 years than anything, because my boss is a native Spanish speaker, and she doesn't speak English very much. And I have to be able to communicate with her. So my Spanish has gotten a lot better. But I'd like to start exercising some other languages as well, because, well, I kind of had a little bit of a wake-up call in the last couple of weeks, and I might end up having to get a different kind of a job. And in whatever job I have, I want to be able to use my language abilities. And so one of the things I think would be a nice, like, marketable skill to be able to have is to be able to translate between Spanish and Russian, because if someone needs like a Russian translator, they're going to find a Russian person to do that. They're not going to come to me for that. And if someone needs a Spanish translator, well, the funny thing is I've actually heard that in state jobs they have a really hard time finding like Spanish translators for some reason. I don't know how that's even possible in California, but I guess so. I mean, that seems to be the thing. They want people who can speak Spanish. But what I was thinking would be a good skill to be able to have is to be able to speak quite fluently Spanish and Russian. That way you can translate between, Spanish and Russian instead of either of those in English. And so, that's a skill I've tried to cultivate over the years. But I've never taken it completely seriously either. I mean, maybe for a time, but not for too long. And language is something that takes years and years to develop, and unless you're a savant, I mean, if you're just like a slow boy like me, it takes years, and especially when you're untalented in that field. I suck at learning languages, honestly. I'm really interested in it, and I really wanted to do it. When I was younger, when I was in my early 20s, I started developing a foreign language library. I've got tons and tons of books on foreign language. And my idea, but there's a difference between buying books and actually freaking reading them, and then there's a bigger difference between reading those books and retaining it and being able to use it and being able to use language. And in order to be able to use language, you have to actually use it, and you have to be in a situation to use it. And I've found that unless I'm in a situation where I'm stuck with that person, they don't know my language and I don't know theirs, and I'm forced to have to try to communicate, and there's a language barrier, that's the best way to learn. Because you're both on an equal footing. It's not like the other person, I've found in situations where if the person is a Spanish speaking person but they also speak English, it doesn't make sense to speak Spanish with them, because I'm just kind of making a fool out of myself. If they can speak English better than I can speak Spanish, it doesn't make sense. So the best situation is when, they don't speak English and you don't speak Spanish maybe as well, and you're trying to learn it. Then you both look stupid, and it's not like one person is on a higher, you're on an equal playing field at that point. And that is, I think, the most fertile ground to try and learn a language. And I found that different language communities respond differently to Americans trying to speak their language. The French are not going to be nice to you if you go to France and try to practice your 9th grade Spanish skills in Paris. They're gonna pretend like you're not even there. And I've found that is, and some people have attributed that to just the rudeness of French people or whatever, but yeah, maybe it's that, maybe it's not, maybe it's something else. I don't know. Maybe there's other things that are bothering them. But I found that with Dutch people, they also don't like to try and teach you Dutch, and it's understandable from their point of view. They don't do it because they're rude. In the case of the Dutch, I found that to be the case. The Dutch people, they're not generally rude people, but they don't want to speak Dutch with you unless you're a native speaker. Unless you're a Dutchman, they don't want to hear your version of Dutch because it's going to sound ugly to them. And it's because Americans have a hard time with Dutch. They make sounds we don't make with their throat, the throat of the G, genoeg, and they say words like that. And they say genoeg gegeten, Americans can't make that sound without sounding like they're coughing up a hairball. Well, they sound like they're coughing up hairballs too, but at least with them, there is a dignity to it. But when Americans try to, make those sounds, there's certain sounds that only Dutch people can make, and it takes years of acculturating their throat to this kind of abuse. But for instance, and I had a Dutch tutor who worked for the UN, and he was a Surinamese Dutch, that's South American Dutch colony, and so their Dutch is a little bit different. But he told me that during World War II, they would catch the German spies, the Nazi spies or whatever, by making them say Scheveningen, which is the name of a town, a city or whatever in Holland called Scheveningen. But Germans can't say Scheveningen because they don't make the same sound. The SCH, they say sh, and then some people say Scheveningen, and so it doesn't sound right. But for Dutch people, Scheveningen. Like it's something that they're used to saying, and so they would force the spies to have to say that word so that they can know whether or not they're really Dutch. So, like, because a German person can learn Dutch, but they're not going to be able to say the name of that town. And so that's just a little anecdote from him, but it's demonstrative of the fact that Dutch people are unique in their phonetic abilities, I guess you could say, because most people never use the hard G. I've heard something that's close to it in Arabic. I've heard it in Arabic, but I haven't heard it in many other languages. Like even the Scottish have loch, and then like you get a little bit of it, the hard G in Spanish. When you say like the word like Angela, they have a little bit of a hard G too, but it's not the same as Dutch. When they say gezelligheid, it comes from the throat. It's very throaty. You have to drink milk before you say it. So with the Russian thing, so I want to do like a Russian program where I'm not teaching Russian, but what I want to do is give like an overview of like where I'm at in my Russian studies, and like certain things that I've noticed with Russian and experiences I've had with Russians, and with like as far as like trying to practice and trying to speak to them and their response to me and how they act. Like, how should I say? A lot of Americans have a misconception of Russian people that they're cold and kind of mean, and it's not the case. The truth is that they're just like we are, and I've found that the bridge to reaching that point with them, and because like the Russian language is very intimidating, it's really hard to freaking speak, but and if they're speaking that language, you're not even going to try unless you know some of it, right? But I've found with Russians that when you know some Russian and you know a few Russian, all you have to do is say a few phrases and they really open up to you and they will instantly become your friend. So like how I was saying, like how the French and the Dutch don't like it when you try to speak their language. I've found that in contrast to that Russians are very appreciative towards Americans, even if they get it wrong. Even if you get the Russian, they'll sit there and teach it to you. And some of them will make fun of you. I had this friend, Bogdan, and he told me, he said, your Russian is terrible. And I was like, yeah, you're exaggerating. My Russian's not that bad. He's like, no, it's really bad. But most Russians have told me that my pronunciation is pretty good. So I'm going to take their word for it. I think that Bogdan was just being an asshole. Yeah, I mean, my grammar sucks, and like I'm not fluent for sure, but I'd say for an American I'm pretty good. And so I want to make I do want to make a program where I'm doing some Russian, and I'm not trying to show off, like, The problem is that most Americans can't speak another language. We have an American empire, and when you're part of an empire, you don't speak other languages. And you know what? Russians is almost the same way. Russians generally only speak Russian because they don't have the need to learn another language. If they live in Russia, they don't need to learn English. They don't need to learn French. They don't need to learn German. I mean, those will probably be the languages that they do learn if they're going to learn one. But they're not going to try and learn Finnish. They're not going to learn Polish. They're going to make Polish people learn Russian. They're going to make Romanian people speak Russian. Not the other way around. They don't go to Romania and speak Romanian. They're like, no, you speak Russian. Like they're going to force it upon like the Balkan states. But they're not going to. They're the empire over there. They're the East European empire. Just like how we're, the Western empire. And so Americans don't learn other languages. And I don't even think Americans really know how to learn languages. Like, it's almost impossible I'd say that probably 0.01% of Americans actually can speak another language, if that. I'd say maybe 1 out of 1,000 Americans can speak another language conversationally, much less fluently. And I mean, I'll put myself in the same category. I speak 5 other languages, but I speak them only in a limited capacity. I have a working knowledge of 5 different languages at different varying levels. So I'd say probably the one I speak best is Spanish, and my Spanish isn't that good, you know, but I can get by. Like if I'm with somebody who doesn't speak English, I can get by with my Spanish. If I was to be forced to like move to like El Salvador, God forbid, I would get by. I'd be able to take care of things. I'd be able to handle myself, hopefully. Especially if I had a gun. But my goal is to try to learn Russian at some point. And what I want to do is I want to develop with this program I've got right now, I want to work Russian into it to where it's like I'm kind of like taking you with me on my Russian journey and showing what I'm working on and what my techniques are. So it's not just me showing off. It's more like I'm sharing my my learning process so that you can see how like one can learn another language. And maybe I've got some weird, strange techniques that like you haven't thought of, you know, because I do get pretty creative with it. I mean, I use technology to my advantage. One of my favorite things with Russian to use, I use Wiktionary. And one of the reasons I use Wiktionary is because, and I also have a Russian dictionary here that's pretty decent. And I think I've shown it in an earlier episode. And one of the things I like about it is it has the stress for every word, because in Russian the stress can be on any syllable. It's not uniform. You know, like in English we have kind of a system by which we use our stress. But with Russian the stress goes anywhere and everywhere. And there's really no logic to it. You just have to get used to it. When you learn the word, you learn what the stress is, and sometimes the stress can change according to your case or whatever. And so what I like about Wiktionary is that the stress is indicated. And 9 out of 10 Russian dictionaries don't indicate stress, and you have no way of knowing. And I mean, I don't see how a publisher would put forth or issue a Russian dictionary without putting the stress. It's kind of stupid, but it's what it is. So I think I want to have like a language portion of this thing that I'm doing, whatever this is, my episodes. You know, I do books, I do book analyses. I've got like the conspiracy stuff that I do. I've got the you know, kind of geopolitical stuff. I've got and then I try and do some classics, and then I try and do some relatively modern fiction. Now, I'm not going to be doing any pop stuff. I don't want to like I don't want to be like up here like taking requests. In other words, like I'm not going to read Game of Thrones for you. Okay, so like whatever it is, it's my radio. We're in my car, you know, and I picked the channel that we're listening to. So if you want to come along for the ride, yeah, I've got certain books that have been like constant, like this Sachar's History of Israel. This is my 3rd installment of that, and as we go I try and recapitulate what I did earlier, and I try and whittle it down. And so I take whichever ones I've done in the past and kind of like distill them down to their essence, and then by the time we're done with that book, I mean, I don't know if I'll ever finish it, but you know, I'll be able to kind of give like an essential breakdown of the book. Even though the book's like over 1,000 pages, you know, I'll be able to say just in a few short phrases, a few short sentences, what, you know, what's the gist of the book. And so even as I go through and on each episode I'll focus on one section of the book, eventually I'll recapitulate it and be able to sort of distill it. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about some of the books I've been reading. So this one, Alexander Solzhenitsyn's The Gulag Archipelago. This is volume 1 out of 3, okay? I've got this one, but I also have another one up there that is like an abridged version. That's the whole thing down to like 500 pages. and I'm probably nearly halfway done with that. So I'd be like on probably book 2 of this, for that set. But what's interesting about the Gulag Archipelago is that it gives an idea of how bad things could get here. I mean, like, with our current political climate and our current administration and all the crazies out there who want to try and control everything, and all the nutbags out there that apparently are totally cool with authoritarianism, what we could be seeing in our future is something very dark and disgusting and evil. And if you think things can't get bad, if you think it couldn't happen here, read this book, The Gulag Archipelago. It talks about the arrests, the detainment, the conditions of the holding cells and transportation of mass amounts of this country's own citizens who it deemed to be domestic terrorists, insurgents, dissidents, political dissidents from within their own country. Their government destroyed their lives and literally, tortured, killed, enslaved, imprisoned people, the Russian people, after, as soon as this, the Russian Revolution happened. The revolution of the Russian revolutionaries were very idealistic. They thought that what they were doing was good. They thought they were helping the downtrodden, unfortunate proletariat, that these were people who had been oppressed. And the minute they gained control, they began to oppress all the people who they deemed to be their enemies. And as they established their government, they became instant totalitarians. And anybody who even was rumored to be thinking against their political party, they captured those people, interrogated them, tortured them, imprisoned them for decades, oftentimes. 3 10-year sentences in a row. Just for the most minor things. For being rumored to have beliefs that go against the party. And so, I think it's a really important book for everybody to read. Everybody in America should read that book so that we could see what's going to happen if we let the authoritarians take control in our country. Because if they do, they will repeat everything that's in that book. So another book I've been reading is this one. This is The Secret History of the American Empire by John Perkins. He's the guy who wrote Confessions of an Economic Hitman. This is the sequel to that. This is a library book. Okay, and kind of looks like Joe Biden on the front a little bit. Or it kind of reminds me of like those scenes in CSI when they would show David Caruso and like the hair would, like his hair would be blowing in the wind and he's wearing these aviator sunglasses. Like trying to make that guy look cool took some serious special effects. Some serious cinematography went into making David Caruso look like not a pussy. Because he always played a little pussy-ass bitch in every movie he was ever in. Remember when he was in Rambo? Or First Blood? The first one, they were just... all the other cops were smacking him around and shit. So this one, The Secret History of the American Empire, talks about... and I think the Confessions of an Economic Hitman also... this just kind of like goes into a little bit more. This talks about how this guy, he was like a broker who would go over to countries like Indonesia, and he would broker deals with their government on behalf of big industry and corporations, and basically just exploiting the shit out of the resources of third world countries, putting their people into further and further poverty and slavery. And so it's kind of like how you've got like the Nike factory in another country, and it's got like slave children working there, or like the Apple iPhone or whatever. You know, you've got all these huge American companies going over to other countries and exploiting their resources. And I think in the book it says something like 75 to 80% of the world's resources come to America for our consumption. So we consume like 80% of the world's resources. And so, I mean, if you were to like look at that in terms of population, like we're just like the fat guy at the lunch. We're the fat guy at the buffet who just ate all the chicken, you know, and everybody else starves while we just sit there all fat like that guy on Monty Python, The Meaning of Life, with just like the like gruel just like pouring out of the side of his mouth, and he's barfing in buckets and just being disgusting. That's kind of how we are on the world stage. Which reminds me, then there's this book, The Next Decade by George Friedman. I think I brought this up on the last episode, and I read a little bit more of it. And this one talks about how this was written in 2011, by the way. So this next decade has already taken place. So some of his predictions, you know, were right, but where did he really miss? Okay, so like he wrote this book during Obama's first term. And he taught, like, his main thesis so far in this book is that America is an empire, whether we want to admit it or not, and whether we proclaim it or not. And we're best probably not proclaiming it, but we are. And that we need to act accordingly. We need to act like an empire. Not that we need to go around and colonize everything, but that we need to assert our dominance in as benign a fashion as possible. And I'm not talking about spreading democracy or spreading diversity, inclusion, and equity to all the third world nations. It's more like the rising tide raises all boats kind of theme, and how we need to apply that to the world. And it talks about how we're regionalizing, and this George Friedman guy seems to be a little bit pro-globalist, and he talks about how there needs to be like continental regions, and how we need to sort of cultivate each of those regions and develop. He talks about being sort of Machiavellian to some degree in our dealings on the world stage, in much the same way that like maybe the CIA might operate in this sort of like amoral capacity for just doing what's best for America. And this idea that we pinpoint different sort of continental regions, and we cultivate those regions, and we have separate dealings with each one, but that we shouldn't ever be married to being either enemies or allies with any one nation. That it should be very fluid, and that we should sort of move around accordingly. Like if our relationship with Israel becomes toxic, like we shouldn't be married to the idea that we always constantly support Israel no matter what, no matter what they're doing. Like if they're doing something that we don't like, or something that doesn't work for us, or something that doesn't benefit us, maybe we should break away from them, and maybe we shouldn't be totally averse to the idea of working with Iran in some capacity, not necessarily giving them nuclear weapons, but like the idea that we can have trade with them. And so there are reasons why certain parts of the world hate us you know, of course, a lot of those are good reasons given in that Confessions of an Economic Hitman book. But George Friedman basically talks. It's funny, like if only he could have seen the next decade. He didn't really see where we ended up going, because like, okay, so one of the things I think that he saw wrong was that us being this burgeoning, well, this established empire, and that like he's saying that like Obama or whatever presidents in the next 10 years needed to take like sort of like accept the fact that we are this empire and make America, like grow America on the world stage, and how like we need to sort of flex that muscle and use it, you know, to raise all boats. But as we've seen, you know, like he didn't foresee Trump. He didn't foresee America's response to Trump. That Trump brought in this America first, kind of America is great kind of thing. And the people didn't really want, or I wouldn't say the people didn't want. There's a huge faction of the country that didn't want. It's like, oh, make America great again. You know, like that's something terrible to make America great. But and then you see Biden, who's obviously trying to diminish, and I think that Obama to some degree did this, although George Friedman didn't make note of it, that, you know, like the Obama spirit sort of, like, I'm not saying that Obama is the puppet master behind Biden, but, you know, who knows who is. Maybe it's just the Council on Foreign Relations telling both of them what to do, you know. But the idea during Obama's presidency was let's not be that empire, you know. So George Friedman's saying let's accept that role. Like maybe like under the Obama administration, it became clear that by his second term that he was trying to diminish America's role on the world stage and decrease, like shrink our military. And now with this DEI and SDG kind of thing, it seems like corporations are trying, and I think a lot of this is under the auspices of BlackRock, but that a lot of these corporations, it's no longer about making more money. Like if you look at Disney, they're taking these billions of dollars of hits to try to work in this diversity, equity, and inclusion thing. And I think a lot of that, to some degree, BlackRock's just got a lot of these companies by the short hairs. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the relationship is between BlackRock and Disney, or BlackRock and Budweiser, you know, or these or Target, or these companies that, all these companies that got really huge during you know the pandemic. You know, all those companies that, like, you know, 10x'd their net worth or their capital or whatever during the lockdowns, you know, while everybody else, like all the private businesses went under. All those companies that got bigger all of a sudden don't seem to be worried about profits anymore. And so they're all kind of jumping on this bandwagon of this SDG thing. And it's all, I think, in deference to the World Economic Forum. So we'll see what comes of that. Okay, so I haven't picked this one up in a while. Tragedy and Hope. But I'm going to get back to this soon. But I kind of wanted to read out of this a little bit. I don't know how far I'm going to get, but for anybody who doesn't believe that there is such a thing as the New World Order, the Illuminati, whatever you want to call it, I'll don my boomer glasses for this. Okay, so this book talks about this guy named John Ruskin who came to Oxford. He was the professor. Okay, there was no professorship of fine arts in Oxford, but in that year, thanks to the Slade request, John Ruskin was named to such a chair. He hit Oxford like an earthquake, not so much because he talked about fine arts, but because he talked also about the empire and England's downtrodden masses, and above all, because he talked about all three of these things as moral issues. Now, I made a note on this paragraph. John Ruskin, in order to save British elitism. So he basically gave this speech at Oxford, and there was a student there named Cecil Rhodes who wrote down everything that he said. And he basically just talked about how he was going to save the sort of downtrodden masses through imperialism. And like I said, the rising tide raising all boats. So the next paragraph, Ruskin's message had a sensational impact. His inaugural lecture was copied out in longhand by one undergraduate, Cecil Rhodes, who kept it with him for 30 years. Rhodes lived from 1853 to 1902. Rhodes feverishly exploited the diamond and gold fields of South Africa, rose to be Prime Minister of the Cape Colony. Hold on, I got it. Someone's at the door. Okay, so back to this. Rhodes feverishly exploited the diamond and gold fields of South Africa, rose to be the Prime Minister of the Cape Colony, contributed money to political parties, controlled parliamentary seats both in England and in South Africa, and sought to win a strip of British territory across Africa from the Cape of Good Hope to Egypt. Okay, that's a considerable stretch of land. And to join these two extremes together with the telegraph line, and ultimately with the Cape to Cairo railway. Rhodes inspired devoted support for his goals from others in South Africa and in England. With financial support from Lord Rothschild and Alfred Bate, he was able to monopolize the diamond mines of South Africa as De Beers Consolidated Mines, and to build up a great gold mining enterprise as Consolidated Goldfields. In the middle 1890s, Rhodes had a personal income of at least £1 million sterling per year, then about $5 million, which was spent, and of course this book here is written in the 60s, okay, so which was spent so freely for his mysterious purposes that he was usually overdrawn on his account. These purposes centered on his desire to federate the English-speaking peoples and to bring all the habitable portions of the world under their control. Let me read that again. These purposes of Cecil Rhodes, with all his money, centered on his desire to federate the English-speaking peoples and to bring all the habitable portions of the world under his control, under their control. I guess that was his pronoun there, right? He was they, them. For this purpose, Rhodes left part of his great fortune to found the Rhodes Scholarships. What Rhodes Scholars do we know of? Well, Bill Clinton was a Rhodes Scholar. Bill Clinton was actually... This guy who wrote this book was Bill Clinton's mentor. Who else was a Rhodes Scholar? Who's that one lady on NB, that really obnoxious, horrible woman? What's her name? That kind of Reagan-esque looking haircut. What's her name? Let's forget about her anyway. Rachel Maddow, that's her name. She's a Rhodes Scholar, isn't she? Okay. For this purpose, Rhodes left part of his great fortune to found the Rhodes Scholarships at Oxford in order to spread the English ruling class tradition throughout the English-speaking world as Ruskin had wanted. Okay, so to become a Rhodes Scholar, you have to sign on to this tradition. Okay, you cannot spurn the tradition outlined here and be a Rhodes Scholar. Among Ruskin's most devoted disciples at Oxford were a group of intimate friends, including Arnold Toynbee, Alfred Milner, I think I referred to him as John Milner in an earlier episode. I said John Milner, like John Milner was that greaser boomer cool guy on American Graffiti. No, Alfred Milner. Okay, I think John might have been his middle name. Okay, so among Ruskin's most devoted disciples at Oxford were a group of intimate friends including Arnold Toynbee, Alfred Milner, Arthur Glazebrook, George Parkin, Philip Lyttelton, and Henry Birchenough. These were so moved by Ruskin that they devoted the rest of their lives to carrying out his ideas. A similar group of Cambridge men, including Reginald Belial Brett, Lord Esher, Sir John B. Seeley, Albert Grey, Lord Grey, and Edmund Garrett were also aroused by Ruskin's message and devoted their lives to extension of the British Empire and uplift of England's urban masses as two parts of one project which they called Extension of the English-Speaking Idea. They were remarkably successful in these aims because England's most sensational journalist, William T. Stead, an ardent social reformer and imperialist, brought them into association with Rhodes. This association was formally established on February of 1891 when Rhodes and Stead organized a secret society of which Rhodes had been dreaming for 16 years. In this secret society, Rhodes was to be the leader. Stead, Brett, and Milner were to form an executive committee. Arthur Balfour, Harry Johnston, Lord Rothschild, Albert Grey, and others were listed as potential members of a circle of initiates, while there was to be an outer circle known as the Association of Helpers, later organized by Milner as the Round Table Organization. Brett was invited to join this organization the same day, and Milner a couple of weeks later, on his return from Egypt. Both accepted with enthusiasm. Thus, the central part of the secret society was established by March 1891. It continued to function as a formal group, although the outer circle was apparently not organized until 1909 through 1913. This group was able to get access to Rhodes's money after his death in 1902, and also to the funds of loyal Rhodes supporters like Alfred Beit and Sir Abe Bailey. With this backing, they sought to extend and execute the ideals that Rhodes had obtained from Ruskin and Stead. Milner was the chief Rhodes trustee, and Parkin was organizing secretary of the Rhodes Trust after 1902, while Gell and Birchenough, as well as others with similar ideas, became officials of the British South Africa Company. They were joined in their efforts by other Ruskinite friends of Stead's like Lord Grey, Lord Esher, and Flora Shaw. In 1890, by a stratagem too elaborate to describe here, Miss Shaw became head of the colonial department of the Times, the Times, while still remaining on the payroll of Stead's Pall Mall Gazette. Okay, so these people not only infiltrated academia, they infiltrated banks, they infiltrated the media at the time, which was just newspapers and magazines. Okay, so what has the media become? Do you think these people are gone? Well, yeah, they are, but their progeny, the people who they have handed the torch to, okay? So, as they tried to consolidate and federate the English-speaking people, of course they did their best to bring America under their wing, and they did so through the elite business magnates of New York, the Eastern Seaboard, the Rockefellers, the Morgans, William Randolph Hearst, all these people were involved. Okay, and the Astors, who else? Okay, so it talks about the Cliveden set in here. It gets to that. Okay, talks about the Cliveden set. Lionel Curtis. Okay, so does that sound familiar? That they've infiltrated every institution and every aspect of public life, from the universities to the media to the government to the banking system. Okay, and so remember how George Bush went on a campaign and was talking about a new world order? Okay, so that's what this is still around today. And the World Economic Forum is their sort of public relations arm, the mouthpiece of this system. Okay, so all the banks, all the international banks still hold sway. They have an international banking cartel that has never gone away, that has remained in power and controlled governments and media and universities, like education, now food, okay, and tons of other, just every aspect of your life, basically, that is under their control. And now we've got BlackRock, who is controlling all the major corporations through this DEI and SDG sustainability goals, all that stuff, then the climate and all the stuff, and PDIMS and stabbies, all this stuff, okay, and they all have a similar ethos that is technocratic in nature and aims towards technopoly and transhumanism. Okay, and if you think that the COOF has nothing to do with that, then you'd be mistaken. Okay, I don't want to read this whole thing right now, but I'll read a little bit more. They were joined in their efforts by other Ruskinite friends of Stead's like Lord Grey, Lord Esher, Flora Shaw. In 1890, by a stratagem too elaborate to describe here, Miss Shaw became head of Colonial Department of the Times while still remaining on the payroll of Pall Mall Gazette. In this post, she played a major role in the next 10 years in carrying into execution the imperial schemes of Cecil Rhodes, to whom Stead had introduced her in 1889. Okay, and how did I summarize that? Okay, Ruskin's most devoted disciple is Rhodes's inner circle. Okay, so I made some notes on this. I'll read just one more. I've got a lot underlined here. In the meantime, in 1884, acting under Ruskin's inspiration, a group which included Arnold Toynbee, Milner, Gell, Gray, Seeley, Michael Glazebrook, founded the first settlement house, an organization by which educated upper-class people could live in the slums in order to assist, instruct, and guide the poor, with particular emphasis on social welfare and adult education. The new enterprise, set up in East London with P.L. Gell as chairman, was named Toynbee Hall after Arnold Toynbee, who died in 1883. This was the original model for the thousands of settlement houses, such as Hull House in Chicago, now found throughout the world, and was one of the seeds from which the modern government for adult education and university extension grew. Okay, Settlement House, Toynbee Hall. Okay, so I've got some things underlined here. As Governor General and High Commissioner of South Africa in 1897 through 1905, Milner recruited a group of young men, chiefly from Oxford and from Toynbee Hall, to assist him in organizing his administration. Through his influence, these men were able to win influential posts in government and international finance, and became the dominant influence in British imperial and foreign affairs up to 1939. Under Milner in South Africa, they were known as Milner's Kindergarten until 1910. In 1909 through 1913, they organized semi-secret groups known as Round Table groups in the chief British dependencies and the United States. These still function in 8 countries. They kept in touch with each other by personal correspondence and frequent visits, and through an influential quarterly magazine, The Round Table, founded in 1910 and largely supported by Sir A. Bailey's money. In 1919, they founded the Royal Institute of International Affairs, or Chatham House, for which the chief financial supporters were Abe Bailey and the Astor family, okay, owners of the Times. Similar institutes of international affairs were established in the chief British dominions and in the United States, where it is known as the Council on Foreign Relations. The Council on Foreign Relations is who hands down policy to the president in the period 1919 through 1927. Do you know who Do you know who Zbigniew Brzezinski is? Okay. Basically, what the fuck is his name? David Rockefeller started the Council on Foreign Relations with Zbigniew Brzezinski. Okay. And then they also together, then they brought in Henry Kissinger, and they started the Trilateral Commission, which was a technocratic group who brought Jimmy Carter from just a lowly peanut farmer into becoming the president of the United States. And they've been in positions of power ever since. Okay, so that was okay. It established the Council on Foreign Relations in the period of 1919 through 1927. After 1925, a somewhat similar structure of organizations known as the Institute of Pacific Relations was set up in 12 countries holding territory in the Pacific area. The units of each British Dominion existing on an interlocking basis with the Round Table Group and the Royal Institute of International Affairs in the same country. In Canada, the nucleus of this group consisted of Milner's undergraduate friends at Oxford, such as Arthur Glazebrook and George Parkin, while in South Africa and India, the nucleus was made up of former members of Milner's kindergarten. These included Patrick Duncan, B.K. Long, Richard Feedham, and Dougal Malcolm in South Africa, and William Maris James Meston and their friend Malcolm Haley in India. The groups in Australia and New Zealand had been recruited by Stead through his magazine, The Review of Reviews, as early as 1890 by Parkin at Milner's instigation in the period 1889 through 1910, and by Lionel Curtis, also at Milner's request. The power and influence of this Rhodes-Milner group in British imperial affairs and in foreign policy since 1889, although not widely recognized, can hardly be exaggerated. We might mention as an example that this group dominated the Times from 1890 to 1912 and has controlled it completely since 1912, except for the years 1919 through 1922. Because the Times has been owned by the Astor family since 1922, the Rhodes-Milner group was sometimes spoken of as the Cliveden set, named after the Astor country house where they sometimes assembled. Okay, so does that sound like anything like the Bilderberg group? Okay, because these people, it's all one big incestuous pit of evil nonsense, okay? Numerous other papers and journals have been under the control or influence of this group since 1889. They have established and influenced numerous university and other chairs of imperial affairs and international relations. Some of these are the Bate chairs at Oxford and Montagu Burton chair at Oxford, the Rhodes chair at London, and the Stevenson chair at Chatham House, the Wilson chair at Aberystwyth, and others, as well as such important sources of influence as Rhodes House at Oxford. Okay, one more quick paragraph here. From 1884 to about 1915, the members of this group worked valiantly to extend the British Empire and to organize it in a federal system. They were constantly harping on the lessons to be learned from the failure of the American Revolution and the success of the Canadian Federation of 1867. They were constantly harping on the lessons to be learned from the failure of the American Revolution and the success of the Canadian Federation of 1867, and hoped to federate the various parts of the empire as seemed feasible, then confederate the whole of it with the United Kingdom into a single organization. They also hoped to bring the United States into this organization to whatever degree was possible. I'm going to repeat that. They also hoped to bring the United States into this organization to whatever degree was possible. Stead was able to get Rhodes to accept, in principle, a solution which might have made Washington the capital of the whole organization, or allowed parts of the empire to become states of the American Union. The varied character of the British imperial possessions, the backwardness of many of the native peoples involved, the independence of many of the white colonists overseas, and the growing international tension which culminated in the First World War made it impossible to carry out the plan for imperial federation. Although 5 colonies in Australia were joined into the Commonwealth of Australia in 1901, and 4 colonies in South Africa were joined into the Union of South Africa in 1910. So what did I write here? To bring the U.S. back under British control. Okay. So I'll end it there. I've got other books here, but I'll talk about them later. I think I did enough here with this reading.